Normally in all of my videos, I would identify one aspect or reason why a thing is great or terrible, but that's not possible for today, since there are too many and there is no single reason why the Gears of War franchise is now effectively a dead brand, as it pains me to say. For the past year after the launch and release of the latest sequel to the new Gears franchise, there has been a lot of talk and discussion about the future of Gears of War games. Considering the latest entry in the series was a failure and pretty much a franchise killer, a lot of fans and all fellow players alike have dumped this franchise, most of them for good. While a tiny majority of Gears of War and Gears communities alike are still holding out hope that one day the series will get better, if it ever will. Gears 5 was an awful game, a dumb, big-budget, pointless waste of time, incoherent rehash of old ideas that have been done far better 13 years earlier. A video game so shitty that it destroyed in quite an effective manner Gears of War as a viable video game property and truly out of fan goodwill. It's basically a goldmine of bad writing providing an almost inexhaustible supply of terrible creative decisions. And with that being said, let's get into this.
Judgment time.
For those of us who remember when Gears of War was actually smart, creative, professional, and mature and diverse, following Gears of War, Gears of War 2, Gears of War 3, and Judgment, which have been gamer fan favorites for the whole planet, we have seen sequels fail to capture what everyone loved about those games. We had the plank of wood McDonald's product Gears of War 4, which was basically a discount version of Gears of War 3, and the disjointed, shameless, half-hearted, creatively bankrupt, and revamping Gears 5. If there was any time to get this series back on track and recapture what everyone loved about the originals, this was the time. When Gears 5 was announced and revealed at E3 in 2018, it had piqued my interest. We were going to go back to some familiar locations from the originals in the story, the classic characters returning, and of course some typical gameplay improvements. It then proceeded to not deliver on any of those promises or only deliver a couple of them halfway. Gears of War 4 was a disappointment and made me feel a little hollow, and I wasn't really enthused by it because it wasn't new, it didn't expand or push anything, it changed almost nothing, and it made the Gears of War universe a lot smaller. So for Gears 5, I was pretty interested and on board, and then it started to lose me. The early warning signs was the game's director Rod Ferguson making the choice to change the protagonist as well as the identity of the entire franchise to background supporting character Kate Diaz. While him and many developers of the Coalition praising it as a revolutionary, bold, and brave move, making the protagonist the first ever, according to them, strong female character. When one of the best attributes about Gears of War, the original games, and this franchise had to offer was world-favorite strong female characters, and it doesn't even need to be put into words. Old Epic Games and the writers were responsible for Helena Stroud, Anya Stroud, Alicia Valera, Alexandra Brand, The Grievous Bodily Love, Bernie Mataki, Sophia Hendrick, all female characters taking charge in a man's world and destroying ultimate threats. So that lost me, followed by all of the third-wave feminist agenda statements with Kate's character, and the developers' goal of using Gears as a platform for identity politics and ideological messaging, to which I was like, what the hell are you doing? And then came the no smoking controversy, and at that point, I was turned off. Even when the trailers came, there was nothing that looked exciting or new, and to my shock, just about all the big player-pleasing moments in Gears 5's campaign story were all in the trailers, so there was nothing surprising there. I'm not sure if the developers have done any legitimate research on this, but paying customers will not support diversity above fun. That is a fact. Politics aside, Gears 5 shamelessly recycled and deconstructed characters, stealing plot points, and iconic moments without the context and history that made them so impactful. Or the fact that whenever anything happens in Gears, the characters are always wearing their plot armor, and the games drop all pretenses of even trying to make sense. Like this tentacle monster thing called a Kraken, a giant plot hole that attacks the heroes with an endless supply of tongues over and over again, wasting precious time and effort effort and doing almost no damage, and when the script needs to move on, something miraculously occurs at the right place at the right time for the heroes to escape or save them. Where did this thing even come from? This thing could crush and destroy things with no problem. Why does it only use one method of attack? Is this thing being controlled, or is it acting on its own will? Is this monster native to Vazgar? If so, why haven't Paddock or the UIR been aware about it? Why doesn't this railgun at point blank blow this monster's head off? If this thing could travel underground, why doesn't it go under and attack New Ephyra when it's right at their doorstep? What is the motivation and purpose of this thing? Wouldn't it have made more sense if this thing appeared earlier, forcing the characters to make decisions and adjustments to stop this threat, giving the characters an obstacle to overcome, a problem that needs to be dealt with? I love how absolutely nobody reports about this thing and the characters give zero fucks about it. Remember the Riftworm from Gears of War 2? Remember how shocking, intriguing, and unsettling this giant monster was? How unstoppable of a force the Locust had at their disposal over the course of the entire game? That was awakened from hibernation after the Lightmass offensive and destruction of the Locust underground network in the previous installment, creating an atmosphere of slowly building menace and danger, punctuated by scenes of devastation and bloody carnage. Remember when Marcus Phoenix and his squad were caught in the middle of attacking Locust forces and the Riftworm and escape seemed impossible? How existing tensions and disagreements within the characters got amplified in a believable way as the pressure started to mount and felt significant and impactful? And the characters making smart decisions and logical measures to counter the growing threat of the Riftworm? And once the destruction and bloodshed started, the script never screwed around, and it was all business from that point on. But in Gears 5, this joke of a monster can take all kinds of damage and punishment and keep going like nothing happened. A monster that's invincible until the plot decides it isn't. With heroes that lurch from crisis to crisis with no idea what they are doing or how to get out of it, and don't face any consequences. Going against the authority of the High Command, launching a weapon they had no jurisdiction or authorization to do so, everything is fine. Taking a break to play a game of rock, paper, scissors when a comrade's life is on the line, everything is fine. Taking a vacation to deal with a personal matter with a war going on and the world in trouble, everything is fine. An inexperienced cadet executing and leading a big operation on foreign soil with territories dominated by wind flares and infested with hundreds of hostile monster forces, everything is fine. Overall, you see how hard it is to buy into a world and story that basically has no logical consistency, because it makes up the rules as it goes along. You don't know what matters because everything could change at the drop of a hat, and as a result, you don't really care what happens or if the characters succeed or not, because none of them deserve to. Such as Kate Diaz in Gears 5. In this scene, she disobeys direct orders to instead go on a quest to find answers and shows this necklace which has the Locust symbol on it, which she has been hiding from everyone. And she explains that she's been having bad dreams, bad visions, and she's been having a hard time controlling herself for a long time. Well, that's interesting. How long has this problem been going on? Why didn't you tell anyone or ask for help, especially earlier? This necklace belonged to your grandmother? If so, where did it come from? Where did your mother get it? What are these dreams and visions that you are having? You can't quit your active duty and just go AWOL. These are all valid questions that sensible people would probably ask before giving the approval for a cadet leaving her commitment to go on some personal quest. And once again, nobody, not even Marcus Phoenix himself, questions this extremely sketchy explanation, like nobody is particularly concerned about anything that's happening.
For months now, I've been having these dreams. Nightmares.
Excuse me?
I think they were messages.
What?
Something's happening to me.
It's your grandmother's?
You are going to tell me everything I don't know, or I'm going to blow your head off.
Hell, none of the characters in positions of command and authority in Gears seem capable of even functioning like normal adults. Kate Diaz is a perfect example. Not only is she given command leading in Gears 5, she makes it immediately obvious that she despises the authority of others and everyone who represents it, like a child who can't regulate their emotional responses and just blurt out whatever's in their head at any moment, rather than recognizing the importance of working with leaders in a time of war and crisis. Personal feelings and emotions are not something that should influence a commander's decision-making. They have to be better than that, especially in the military. Marcus Phoenix and Damon Baird as commanders inspired loyalty and respect while taking risks and making sacrifices to protect their squads, fellow comrades, with good decision-making, effective communication, and actual leadership skills. Kate Diaz demonstrates the exact opposite. She's petulant, vindictive, overbearing, indulging in petty emotional attacks, and treating legitimate questions as a challenge to her entitled authority. She doesn't inspire loyalty and respect because she shows none in return, and only sees the worst in people. And what's really weird is that these games try so hard to paint Kate as some kind of unsung hero. Which brings me to Gears stealing iconic moments and stripping them of their meaning and emotion from the originals. Remember in Gears of War 3 when Marcus Phoenix killed the Locust Queen with the company of his friends and remains of his deceased father once and for all? That was a really good scene that made players feel emotions. This one didn't. As I mentioned earlier and multiple times in previous and other videos, the thing is, once you remove the context, meaning, and history behind a scene and don't give it a moment to breathe or sink in, it loses its impact. When Marcus Phoenix killed the Locust Queen, it was perfectly played out. Marcus killing Mira once and for all, the big bad finally defeated, and you can see how much it hurt and satisfied him to do it. When Marcus kills Mira, he kills her with the knife that belonged to his best friend, that was given to him in a needed situation earlier, and unexpectedly became his. And he stabs Mira in the heart, that Mira took everything from him, justice served for the death of his fallen brother, and avenging those who experienced great cruelty and suffering as well. And so, you emphasize with his pain and loss. It was clever and smart writing for Marcus Phoenix and Dominic Santiago's character arcs. But this is just another thing that happens in a relentless cavalcade of nonsense that passes for Gears 5's plot. Stolen ideas and concepts, reshaped and awkwardly jammed in. Superficial action and style and no substance. Unfulfilled games that you could just turn your brain off, enjoy the pretty colors and nostalgia, and promptly forget about it when you're done playing. And if you take those hours of playing and you use them to think about how these games stack up against the originals, mostly the first two, you realize what a shockingly pale, unimaginative, and dumbed down turd this is in comparison. Gears of War was a colossal hit, commercial success, and an absolute classic that stood the test of time. It was the first Xbox 360 game I bought, and video game that stayed with me even to today. It was a great combination of game development, level design, a solid story, likable characters, terrifying, memorable villains, excellently paced action scenes, and smart, mature, professional ideas. It was a dark, gritty, and serious video game with terror, desperation, and some excitement. It was the fastest-selling video game of 2006, the second most played game on Xbox Live the next year, and became the sixth best-selling Xbox 360 game of all time. And there was such a high demand to make another game, a sequel, and Gears of War 2 did the classic sequel things, fan service and references, while reversing the roles of its two main characters, stepping up the stakes, fleshing out all the characters and the lore of the world, expands upon the elements of the original, it tackled new themes, explored new locations, and ended with purpose. Gears of War 2 is one of the most beloved video game sequels of all time because when it comes to a good sequel, it's the gold standard. Gears, on the other hand, offers just about none of these things. Well, apart from the action, there is plenty of that. The difference here being, there wasn't hot demand for Gears of War sequels after the previous installments. Now back to Gears. The point is, the entirety of Gears feels like something that was made out of necessity rather than any kind of artistic impulse. Microsoft couldn't let this old IP lay to rest, so they bought out the rights, put one of their young new developers to continue it, to kickstart a whole new franchise of sequels, change the title, with a story quickly slapped together that wasn't about continuing the story of Gears of War, but copying the story that had come before, taking what we were already given, recycle the same exact plot beats, elements, and concepts from the originals, except dial everything up to 11 and hope nobody notices. With an attractive world and attractive characters with soap opera levels of melodrama and constant amusement, strung together by a plot you're not meant to think about too much. And I guess that's pretty much the ethos of this entire Gears franchise. Don't think or stop to question it, just consume the product, forget about it, and move on. Everything in Gears is done in the most quick, simplistic, and lazy way possible. A story that meanders from place to place, with no sense of pace or urgency. There's no feeling that it's building up to anything significant, or the characters are up against a time limit. Which brings me again back to the characters. They're boring, simplistic, and dumb, and have nothing approaching an actual arc. JD Phoenix starts out as a guy just doing his job and being told what to do. He starts to go through an actual character arc in the first act of Gears 5, growing, becoming more mature while perfecting his leadership skills, but the script pulls a complete 180 on him and he just takes a back seat for the rest of the game in Gears 5. And overall, he's good-natured and loyal, but he's kind of dumb and a little clumsy, and in the end of Act 1 in Gears 5, his friends all turn on him in one of the most nonsensical things I have ever seen in a video game or movie-related piece of writing. Dale Walker is a goofy, hyperactive secondary and a jerk who's treated as comic relief to the point where it's impossible to take him seriously anymore. He gets some interpersonal drama with JD and Kate at brief times, but he basically exists to clown around, be led from place to place from other characters, and he's a follower being told what to do, and he gets killed off in the final minutes of Gears 5. Kind of, or maybe. Kate Diaz is just along for the ride, reacting to stuff as it happens and doing whatever she has to. A sheltered, arrogant, ignorant, naive woman who is the central plot thread to Gears, and she consistently makes stupid decisions throughout the games, and she doesn't earn any right to be where she is. In fact, her main purpose in Gears and her main objective in Gears 5 was to deal with and handle her connection to the so-called Swarm, including her nonsense ties to Mira, the leader of the Locust from Gears of War, and she achieves that in nearly zero difficulty in the second act of the Gears 5 story, so she has absolutely nothing to go on.
Considering the thing that linked me to the hive mind is dead, we killed it, by the way, you're welcome.
You did it! Congratulations!
As for Marcus Phoenix himself, that Gears of War was built around, Marcus Phoenix feels like a bit player in Gears, consistently pushed into the background and forced to take a back seat to the new characters around him, and the same goes for all of the returning classics. This version of Marcus Phoenix doesn't act, talk, or think anything like the Marcus Phoenix we used to know. He gets belittled and pushed around, especially from Kate, and he just accepts it. He never asserts his authority when it calls for it, or bites back at people when they get out of line, and never makes use of his decades of command and tactical experience. He technically does it once very briefly here in this part in Gears 5, but it's played up for comedy and it doesn't go anywhere, and he just goes around taking a back seat and says and does whatever the plot needs him to. Never mind that this man fought and led in some of the greatest battles in Gears of War's lore of history, ended the Locust War, and his family sacrificing to save the entire planet. That's all meaningless.
I thought you'd be taller.
117, stand down.
Nobody gives a shit about Kate Diaz, despite the writers' increasingly desperate attempts to tie her basically into everything and everyone of note in the Gears and Gears of War universe. So what do you do when you've been told to make new Gears of War games, but you're also a useless, talentless hack that doesn't understand how to come up with compelling, interesting, and sympathetic original characters? Well, you bring in a bunch of old characters that still have a bit of name recognition and fan goodwill, and use them as bait to draw people into your crappy, bland, generic product. Furthermore, as I said many times before, Gears doesn't feel anything like Gears of War. Yeah, there are some references, some familiar locations and familiar characters, but that's where the similarities end. It's like the creators looked up some stuff about Gears of War and just kind of formed their own opinions of what the games were supposed to be about, whatever they wanted to shove into players' mouths and eyes, and implement things that nobody asked for or cared about. And as a result, they have created an entirely, weirdly different and disconnected world, with a Gears of War veneer awkwardly slapped onto it, and video games that have absolutely no identity. I mean, if you wanted a clean slate to start again, why couldn't you just make a new IP? Now, this is probably the heart of the issue for me. See, the original Gears of War games were pretty smart video games when you really think about it. Yes, there was lots of action, violence, mayhem, monsters killing people, testosterone, banter, and a lot of blood and gore, but beneath the surface, the games grappled with some interesting questions and heartfelt moral lessons, like the art of warfare and the horrors of it, the implications of controlling, using, and advancing weapons of mass destruction, or science going too far and man daring to play God with disastrous consequences, or about taking a higher path and using rationality and understanding to solve a problem. The originals took time out to breathe, to establish their worlds and have its characters ask some interesting questions about it, and they were all done in a way that felt like a natural component of the games. Now, you might be asking at this point, what would I have done differently? If I was the creative leader or writer, how would I have approached Gears to tell a story that was just as good as the originals? And my answer is, I wouldn't. Gears of War is a great concept, but you can only do so much with it before you start rehashing the same ideas over and over again, and they simply need to stop. This was the time and opportunity to break the Gears of War mold. We needed the biggest shakeup, but my goodness, it is now officially confirmed. We cannot ever get out of the originals. That's the template. We can't change the template. I'm not opposed to the idea of making more Gears of War games, but if you got nothing new and original and smart, or don't have a lick of imagination to add to an old idea, then do fans in the world a favor and don't fucking add anything. And this is why I like Gears of War Judgment. Gears of War Judgment wasn't that big of a Gears of War game, but it's the best Gears of War game since the trilogy because it changes the template. It explored familiar elements in new ways, it took its time to build and craft itself, while perfectly setting itself up for bigger worlds to play in. What was wrong with that?
The Open Arms program may have given you our uniform, but you and I remain enemies.
Fine. Let's settle this like enemies then.
Hey, that's enough! Stand down. You Garaznys weren't known for treating prisoners very well. I'm sure you know nothing about it.
You want to stay friends? Let's never see each other again.
You're not Onyx.
I'm Onyx.
No, you're not, Cadet. You! Hold this room! There's something big out there!
We will never get out of the first two Gears of War games, and this was the time to make it worth it. It was not worth it. Let's just go back to replaying, experiencing, and exploring the world and lore of the originals, and that's it. These games have lost interest, have no credibility, and the Gears franchise is running on fumes, which honestly is all good news to me. I would rather replay the Gears of War trilogy than play clones of an IP that pretty much has been run into the ground by developers that don't know what the fuck they are doing. I don't know, and nor do I particularly care. Gears is just another sad example of what happens when you have arrogant, talentless, shameless hacks trying to elevate their own mediocre work by standing on the shoulders of giants and trying to restart and continue one of the best video game IPs in history without really understanding what made it work in the first place.
I'll tell you the problem with the scientific power that you're using here. It didn't require any discipline to attain it. You know, you read what others had done, and you took the next step. You didn't earn the knowledge for yourselves, so you don't take any responsibility for it. You stood on the shoulders of geniuses, to accomplish something as fast as you could, and before you even knew what you had, you patented it and packaged it and slapped it on a plastic lunchbox, and now you're selling it. You want to sell it. Well,
The Temple Dogs. The Temple Dogs. The Temple Dogs. The Temple Dogs. The Temple Dogs.